Girls, collectors, and welcome to another Bossk's Bounty video, and welcome to episode 208 of Ask Boss Bounty. This is the weekly Q&A series that drops every Sunday, where I take your questions from the comments section below and do my best to answer them. So if you do have a question for next week's episode, which will be episode 209, and you want to be featured in the video, be sure to leave that question in the comments section of this video. If you do happen to enjoy this video, hit the like button down below, subscribe if you're new. And with all that being said, we have a bumper episode this week with plenty of questions, so let's get on to the first one. Sir Falconer says, question, about how many TVC vehicles does Hasbro produce every year? I mainly collect Black Series and only recently got back into TVC. I find the announcement of the E-Wing odd. I'm not saying it looks bad, but with the Hasbro team claiming they're celebrating the prequels this year, you'd think if they're only going to do one release at about $100 this year, it'd be a Jedi Starfighter episode 2 or 3. I feel like this is something that came from Lucasfilm, as the E-Wing is from current media. Yeah, I mean, as much as I do like the E-Wing, I think it looks great, I do find it to be a bit of an odd choice. I mean, it wasn't in the Ahsoka series for that long, it didn't have much of an appearance, but no doubt it is a very cool vehicle. Now, you mentioned there that you're into the Black Series and you only just got back into TVC. I think with them celebrating the prequels this year, I think that might actually be in the Black Series and the Retro Collection. I don't really see too much celebration going on with the Vintage Collection, unfortunately. No, not in any meaningful way anyway. Certainly not by any vehicle. We'll have to see what happens for the rest of the year, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to be getting too much from the Phantom Menace at least. We might get some prequel stuff. I don't think they're going to be spending too much of the budget on anything new from the prequels specifically, but we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, indeed, the E-Wing was a little bit of an odd choice. I mean, there's some other vehicles in Ahsoka itself which featured a lot more, so yeah, I can understand why you're thinking that. Stephen Novak, who I do believe is one of my oldest channel members and is still a channel member, so thank you so much for that, buddy. And he says, hello Tim, question about the upcoming Vintage Collection Jabba the Hutt set. We already know that 8D8 will be carded, but do you think they will also release Salacious B. Crumb carded on a mini card as well? They've already stated that they are looking into releasing a mini card, but maybe it's this one. Keep up the great work. I think, if I remember correctly, they did actually confirm that Salacious Crumb will be carded, and it more than likely will be a mini card. They haven't said if it's going to be the same mini card that came out with that Death Star set from the San Diego Comic Con way back in TVC 1.0. You know, they might use the same image. It might be the same number. I doubt very much that it'll be on a Revenge card. It'll probably just be a Return of the Jedi card. But they haven't really sort of gone into that sort of detail at the moment. All I know is that I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, they did say it would be carded. Left Coast Graphics says, keep up the great work, Bossk and Little Bossk. My question is, since Kenner Hammerhead is by far the coolest action figure ever made, do you agree that Hammerhead Momar Nadon will be released in TVC and Retros in 2024, since he was pipelined already for the Black Series, Year of Hammerhead? I mean, that would be amazing if he was to be released in the Vintage Collection. I think the fact that he is coming to the Black Series does increase the chance that we will get a Momar Nadon or Hammerhead. An upgrade to this figure would be very cool in the Vintage Collection. Whether it will happen in 2004 is another question entirely. I mean, if you think about the Retro Collection, I know we're getting the Phantom Menace wave, and I think there's one more after that, and I'm led to believe that it isn't original trilogy, so I don't think for the Retros he'll be coming out anytime soon. I think you might have to wait a little bit longer than that, but maybe we'll have to wait until the following year for the Vintage Collection. I don't know, but you know, as I said, as the Black Series are getting that figure now, hopefully that does increase the chance for the Vintage Collection, because as we've seen with many figures these days, they do share those digital sculpts. But I'm with you, buddy. He is a very, very cool alien, and much needed for the Vintage Collection. Eddie GV45 says, question for next week. With the very sad passing of Carl Weathers, what was your favourite role he played that was not Grief Karga? Thanks. Ah, yes, rest in peace, Carl Weathers. That's, yeah, came as a bit of a shock for everyone, I'm sure. What was my favourite role that he played that was not Grief Karga? I mean, obviously, you can't discount his portrayal of Apollo Creed in the Rocky films. Loved those films as a kid, watched them countless times. I do love the Predator movie. Obviously, he played Dylan in that movie. And he's kind of sort of like the bad guy in that film, wasn't he? But yeah, and then you've got Action Jackson. I mean, if you've seen that, that's worth a watch. Very 80s in style, but pretty good film for the time. But yeah, I think I'd probably go with I'd probably go with Dylan in Predator. Patreon supporter Aqualish Doug says, great episode BB, lots of HasLab questions, but one thing was not mentioned was HasLab Dream figure packs. I look at the TVC output over the last few 200 figures, and although there's been loads of great releases, I think that only a handful have been made because of fan polls and campaigns. For example, Lando, Lobot, Bib Fortuna, Admiral Piet, Velkan, Dooku, Revan, and the Rebels crew. My question for next week is, do you think HasLab figure packs are still something Hasbro would consider to complete crews or get more backgrounders such as Cantina aliens produced? I at least hope that it's something on their mind. I mean, Brandon from the UK Hasbro team, if you're watching this video and you want to sort of suggest something to the powers that be in America, then, you know, Dream figure packs is definitely something that the community are talking about, because at the end of the day, the budget doesn't stretch far enough for us to get the characters that we want each year. A lot of the budget goes towards new media characters, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just a fact, because obviously those are figures and characters that we've never had before, and often they can't use tooling that already exists. But to get sort of legacy characters from the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, then, you know, we're never going to be getting those figures really, unless they look at these sort of Dream figure packs. So I'm all for it. I hope they haven't forgotten about it. I hope that they are still on their minds and, you know, consider them a viable option going forward. Hinkley Carter 4744 says, question for next week, what Clone Wars figures are you wanting to be released in either TVC or Black Series? I think an Admiral Trench would be a very cool and interesting addition to either lines, and even though he'd require a brand new unique mould, keep up the great work. I enjoy your videos every week. Thank you, buddy. I think when it comes to the Clone Wars, obviously we've got the clones, right? And there's loads of sort of named clones that I would like for them to bring out in the vintage collection that we don't already have. Apart from that, you know, when it comes to sort of human characters or whatever, I really want them to turn up in sort of new media or live action before they sort of do those in the vintage collection. You know, a little bit like Thrawn, for example. I'm looking forward to hopefully getting Thrawn from the actual Ahsoka series with the actor's portrait. Not that the one that they've brought out in the vintage collection is bad, but I really would like the one that, you know, is based on the person that plays him in the live action. So when I watch the Clone Wars, I don't really think about these characters as being made into figures, basically, because I always just think back to that sort of weird animated Clone Wars line. But there are a few characters that I think should be done. I mean, like, there's some decent bounty hunters out there. Embo is a good one. He'd be a really good character if they could do him in the vintage collection. But again, very much like Cad Bane, I kind of want that character to turn up in new media somehow, you know, and then you can get like sort of that version of him. Rob S says, hey BB, love the channel. I'm a huge original Kenner and original 96 fan. Question for next week, do you think that Hasbro should finish the 96 as some kind of collection exclusive, not really HasLab, but just to make it available for collectors to purchase so the 96 can finally get finished? Is Hasbro aware the 96 is unfinished, or do they not care? Keep up the great work. I think they're fully aware that it's not finished. I mean, when they released the Power Droid back in, when was that, 2019 or something? I can't remember what it was now, 2020. They actually had a hashtag underneath that in the Kenner font, which said complete the 96, I think it was, instead of finish the 96. And I don't think they were suggesting that they're going to be doing that, but they just said, you know, this figure coming out is going to go towards that. So they're very aware of it. Hopefully now Steve Evans is on board, he'll sort of look at that even further. Steve Evans, if you're watching this, you're probably not, but if you are, you know, there are fans out there that want more original trilogy, original 96 figures. You can see the cabinet up there. There's plenty in that cabinet that still have not been, you know, updated to TVC standard with super articulation. So get on that, sir. Rob Ernest says, great vid as always, BP. Question for next week. How likely do you think it is that Hasbro is going to make a new photoreal Finn head sculpt and put it on the VC118? I know you're not the biggest fan of the ST, but I could see Hasbro doing this to release Stormtrooper Finn from Episode 7 with an interchangeable bloodstained helmet like the Black Series version. I'm not the biggest fan of the ST either, but I think it'd make a nice figure in TVC. Thoughts? Keep up the excellent content. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually quite surprised that they haven't done that already. Like, they've had ample opportunities because they've already had the figure there. You know, that is the 3.75 inch Black Series. They could have just taken the head off that and stuck it on that Stormtrooper body. Would I want them to do it now? And this isn't because I'm not really a fan of the ST, it's because, and I think a lot of TVC collectors will agree with this, I think that First Order Stormtrooper figure isn't the best, And, you know, before they sort of start using that one again, I think it needs updating. That's just my personal opinion. I don't think they ever sort of made that figure right in the first place. And yeah, if they're ever going to do the Finn Stormtrooper FN2187 or whatever his name is, then, you know, I hope that that figure could be improved first. But, you know, had they done it when TVC first came back out, when they should have done something like that, then it probably would have been acceptable. Joe the Hobo says, question for next week, what is your longest shot figure that you want? Something that may never happen, but you would be absolutely thrilled for. For me, it would be an Ahsogian Senator, but since it was just a 1-second cameo for E.T. by Spielberg, I can see them never making that character. Yeah, I can definitely see them never making that character too, but I think if I was to pick one, in all honesty, it'd be Oola from Return of the Jedi, because I personally feel that they will never make that figure again. You got her in super articulated form in that Jabba set. That figure is seriously expensive on the secondary market. I've seen some awesome custom card backs for Oola, you know, in vintage collection style. So that is something that I think is a long shot these days. I just don't think they'll ever do it. So I'm going with that. Matt's Collection says, great stuff, Tim. Question for next week. Do you feel like you were screwed on Stu's Star Wars trivia show? Or are you relieved you won't have to face others in later rounds? To be honest, that was a really good, fun night. That was that quiz. That was on Stu, the Universal Collectors channel. I believe there's another episode of that tonight with Daniel Chart on it. But yeah, no, I had great fun on that. It was controversial. You know, there's no two ways about it, but I'm totally over it now. And I think I said, I think I do prefer watching those sorts of things rather than taking part. You know, the pressure is too intense. General Grievous 5026 says, hey boss, long time subscriber, but this is my first time commenting. Welcome. Question for next week. As my name suggests, I'm a huge General Grievous fan. One of the top 5 villains in my opinion. My question is, do you think we could be getting a newly tooled version of General Grievous in the vintage collection? I feel the figure of him we currently have is pretty good, but a bit outdated for today's standards, especially compared to the Black Series version. Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be inferior to the Black Series version just purely because of the age thing. Now, if you look at that card back that I've got in front of you there, the figure inside the bubble there actually doesn't look too bad. It's a really, really good representation of General Grievous. The problem occurs is when you know, have that figure loose essentially and try to stand him up and things like that. He isn't the greatest, but my personal opinion is that Hasbro will probably look at that one and think that's ripe for a repack. I don't think they'll look at that and think, we need to improve on that personally. You know, let me know in the comments section if you agree with that. Not whether you agree if the figure is good enough or not, but whether you think Hasbro will think it's good enough. I personally think they will. And I personally think that there is other characters out there that have either never been made or ones that desperately need an update more so than General Grievous right now. But again, you know, you being a General Grievous fan, buddy, you might disagree with that. But yeah, I think there's other candidates that probably, you know, are ahead of him in that queue. Channel member Carl Wilson says, hi boss, question for next week. Sorry, another HasLab Ghost related question. Are you going to open review the Rebel Crew figures that are coming with the Ghost ship? I have only bought one, so the figures will be kept carded and stored in acrylic cases. Thanks. And he's got my little Bossk emoji there, which channel members can use. So I will be reviewing the Ghost ship. That goes without saying, but you know, the figures within it on those mural card backs, unfortunately, I feel that I will be keeping those carded. I would have opened them 100% had we not got the pipelines for the Rebels crew coming out in the main line. So for me, I just need a version of them, you know, and paying $16.99 for a Kanan or whoever, and opening that figure rather than the mural card back is a lot better for me, I feel. And I think a lot of people are going to be keeping those ones carded, aren't they? Expensive ship, expensive to buy 2 just for those cards. So I will be keeping those carded, my friend. Folsom Since 73 says, question for next week. In a couple of episodes back, you said there was a high probability of a HasLab via K2SO being announced by May the 4th. Do you think it's going to be a Black Series or another vintage collection? Thank you for everything you do. Yeah, I was talking about the vintage collection, and that's purely because I feel that the vintage collection should and will get a HasLab every year. I just feel that HasLab have sort of, you know, realised it's taken them a while, obviously, but, you know, it goes hand in hand, lots of sales. So they get guaranteed sales of the ship, and then they get guaranteed sales of the figures that go with it. And as long as they produce or sell something in the HasLab that has lots of figures that go with it, then they'll make lots of money. So for me, TVC is the perfect thing to do HasLabs for versus anything else because of the scale and the size of things that you can produce. You're not going to get a Millennium Falcon, for example, in the Black Series. You're not going to get a Razor Crest in the Black Series because they'd just be stupidly big and no one would have space for them. So yeah, I was talking about the Vintage Collection, and that's just my feelings. I think we're going to get one this year. Charger9105 says, question for next week, can you please say something nice about the Obi-Wan show? You never pass up a chance to rip it in your videos. Are there any unmade figures from the show you'd like to see in TVC? Hey man, look, I'm not aware that I do rip the Obi-Wan show at every possibility. I've said that it wasn't the best thing that I've ever watched in terms of Star Wars, that Disney Star Wars have produced, but I still enjoyed it, and there are definitely figures that I would like from that show. There's the rest of the Inquisitors that I would like, that the Black Series have, and then there's Ned B that I would still like them to do in the Vintage Collection. There isn't too much more I'd want from that show particularly, but yeah, it was an alright show. I'm not going to say it was bad. I didn't hate it. I just didn't think it was as good as, say, I don't know, The Mandalorian, or certainly nowhere near as good as Andor. Dan Tween says, top vid as always. Is there a maximum limit to the subscribers you can get? I'm not sure how many TVC collectors there are, but that would obviously be your ceiling, as it were. Good luck on the 30k landmark. P.S. Been trying to get through the Bad Batch Season 1 for a few months now and keep falling asleep watching it. Granted, I always watch it late at night. I want to like it, but is this telling me something? I don't think it's telling you something, no. I had the same problem with the Clone Wars, trying to get through that for the second time of watching it, actually. I used to watch it late at night before I went to bed, and ultimately I'd start falling asleep halfway through. And that was more to do with sort of the time that I was watching it, and, that it was late at night rather than the quality of the show, because the Clone Wars was brilliant. So the Bad Batch, I'm with you. Some episodes are a bit sort of filler, but there's some really good episodes in the Bad Batch. Again, going back to the previous question with Obi-Wan, it's not my favourite animated show. I actually prefer the Clone Wars and Rebels to the Bad Batch, but it's still pretty good. It's still Star Wars and things like that. In terms of the subscribers, yep, there's definitely a ceiling, of interest for what I do. As I said, I'd love to get to 30,000 at some stage. I do make videos about other stuff, vintage, for example. I did a video about my case a few weeks back, basically, but yeah, it's predominantly TVC, and there is a limit to how many fans there are. So yeah. 1980 Star Wars guy says, hello there BB, I have a question. With all the outrage and the confusion caused by the new pilot Luke, got me thinking, what is the most unnecessary repack in your opinion? Oh man, there is a few, isn't there? Since TVC's come back, they have released some very odd choices as repacks, in my opinion. I've got a couple here for you here. This is the repacked Han Solo trench coat. That is the Black Series 3.75 inch version. You can see they've got much different trench coat styles there, but of course we had him in TVC 1.0. We had a very similar figure in the Vintage Saga collection in 2007, so that was a completely unnecessary repack. They didn't need to do that. They really needed to redo the figure, which they kind of did last year. Again, they didn't get it 100% right, did they? But there's loads of others, like Baby Anakin. Did we actually need that from the Phantom Menace again? Anakin Skywalker in his peasant disguise, another one that I just felt was a weird one. Clone Captain Ballast with the renamed card, completely unnecessary. And dare I say it, the upcoming Finn. This is the 3.75 inch Black Series version. Did we really need that in the Vintage Collection? Did we really? I don't think so. I think if they're going to do Finn, they should have just done the new version from the, the Rise of Skywalker. But of course, it's an easy repack for them to do, and it gets Finn into the line. I can understand that. And even in the same wave, Cassian Andor again, we do not need that figure repacked, but they're going for it. User HB8BI2SC5S. What a great name. Hi Tim, thanks for the recent great content. Hallmark had a child Leia ornament, so I'm guessing there isn't a child actor license obstacle. Oh, fair enough. Question for next week. In looking at your March Madness picks, I notice it's primarily main characters, troop builders, and a couple of top tier background characters. What would be your top 5 deep dive blink and you'll miss them characters that you'd want to see made? as action figures, or is that something you aren't really interested in? For me, these characters bring variety and excitement to the line, and I miss the days when they were offered regularly. Part of the fun was the "I can't believe they made this character" fact. Yeah, absolutely. I love it when they make these deep dive background characters that you never thought they'd make, you know, like Ephant Mon and Hermie Odal, those types of characters. Love those. But when I approach March Madness, I tend to look at it in two ways. I look at first, you know, what are the characters that I would like to see in the vintage collection, but then I also look at or take into account figures that I feel will do well, that will sell, that will be good for the line, keep the line healthy and all that kind of thing. You know, as much as I would love these weird background aliens from The Force Awakens, for example, in Maz Kanata's Cantina or something from some kid's cartoon, I don't think they're going to be good for the line, so I don't put them on my March Madness 25. I try to keep it to main characters, troopers, things like that. Things that I feel will do well. But of course, there's loads of characters that I would love to see them do from the background. You know, you've got the Ishi Tib, for example, from the Jabba's Palace. We don't have that figure in the vintage collection. You have Window Weequay. You have some others that are on the second skiff. Post Snitkin, the driver, for example. So there's a few of them there. Fat Babies 100 says, "Hey Bossk, greetings from Okinawa. Question for next week. Besides TVC, what are your favourite and least favourite 3.75 inch lines? Personally, I grew up with the Saga collection, so it has a special place in my heart, and I was most disappointed for the Force Awakens line. Really liked the movie, but the figures just weren't it. Keep it up." So yeah, I mean, you know, there's different reasons why I like different lines. I mean, the sort of character selection of the Legacy collection was great, and the Saga collection actually, and the Saga collection looked fantastic as well. I really liked the packaging. The 30th anniversary, the packaging was really, really good. In terms of the ones that I didn't like so much, I've got to be honest, the first Power of the Force figures on those red or orangey blue card backs, you know, with all the sort of steroid Luke Skywalker and Princess Leia, I just don't like those at all. I remember when they came out and they're just not for me, those ones. I'd also say that the Last Jedi line was also a bit of a letdown, you know, figures like DJ and things like that, you know, pretty rubbish figures really at the end of the day, weren't they? And as we know, 5POA is not okay. Phenomenon says, "Yet another great episode. Question for next week. With the recent reveals and the seemingly endless repaints we've been getting, do you think those repacks are just more apparent now that we're getting smaller and less frequent waves and more releases as online pre-orders, and we're not seeing entire aisles of Star Wars figures at our local retailer like we used to see back in the golden years of collecting?" Yes and no. I don't think that there's any more sort of repaints and repacks particularly. I just think we're getting them revealed all now, and I think that's got to do with the fact that there are 2 live action Star Wars shows coming out this year. You've got The Acolyte, which I think the other day was announced that it will be summer this year, and then you've got Skeleton Crew, which is supposed to be fall of 23, which I believe has been put back until right at the end of this year. So you've got to think that there are going to be figures coming out for both of those shows, and maybe we would have already got some of them had the Skeleton Crew, for example, not been put back. So I think, as I said before, a lot of the new tooling budget, a lot of the new figures are always saved for those shows because, of course, we've never had those figures before because they're from new shows. So I feel we're in that sort of area where, because we've got some delays, the figures are going to get delayed as well. That's my personal opinion on it, and you know, and that's probably why a lot of the reveals right now are, you know, simple repaints of a Mandalorian or a repack or whatever. So I just think that's the reason, basically. Miles Hook says, "Next week is 4 years of Ask Boss Bounty. Been watching for a little over 3. Thanks, BB, for all the great shows." Question for next week: what are some of your predictions for prequels releases this year? Are you excited about any prequel figures if new to the line? Is anyone? I've grown to like these movies. Took a long time, but I hope to see a few more to go with Count Dooku. Yeah, absolutely. I hope that we will see more prequel figures, but unfortunately, as I said before, I don't think it's a massive focus in the vintage collection this year for some reason. I think we may see maybe another 4-pack. I saw something online the other day of the Phase 1 clone troopers with the officers with all the different colours, and I thought it was a real reveal when I saw it. It was so well done. So like a 4-pack of those would be pretty cool. They've already done a 4-pack of the actual white Phase 1 clone because they didn't wait for the new mould, so we've got those in skinny. So I don't think they'll do that again, but you know, I think at the time when that one came out, everyone said, why didn't you just do the officers? We need the yellow, the blue, blah blah blah. So maybe that's something they could do. But as I say, when I saw that, I thought, wow, that A, looks real, and B, what a great idea that would be. So maybe they could do something like that for the prequels. Who knows, man? But it did get me thinking when talking about the prequels and the previous questions about background characters and things like that. You know, how is it possible that we've got Dulce Divine, for example, in the vintage collection when we haven't got some of the other, like, main characters still? You know, we haven't even got Newt Gunray, who is one that you would think that they would do of this species, wouldn't you? But yeah, it's amazing to me that Dulce Divine exists in the vintage collection. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a good figure. You know, I'm not complaining that we've got him. I just find it amazing that we do have him and not some of the other characters from that film. Georgios Christodoulou says, hey BB, love the content. Question for next week. I'm a massive fan of the Jedi Temple Guards and it's a shame it was released only as a 5POA figure, which is very expensive. Do you think they would make the figure in TVC? I think it would look great in a 4-pack. Yeah, I can't say whether they'll make it or not, but I think it's one that is highly requested by fans out there. I think, you know, a lot of people like that design, and you know, now that we're getting Kanan and some of the other Rebels characters, you know, maybe they will, you know, revisit that character in super articulated form. I think, you know, maybe a 4-pack would be a good one to do for that as well. But yeah, certainly very cool characters. All right then, guys, that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for submitting your questions. Be sure to leave your questions in the comments section below for next week's episode. I absolutely love doing these videos, so keep it going. Thanks so much for watching, and also thank you to my Patreon supporters and channel members for the extra support. And we shall see you on the next one.